I was journeying towards death and didn't even know it. I didn't realize it until a couple of years after Lance passed away, and then it hit me. I was living in his world, and that was the journey that he was on, was heading towards death. So it made sense that I was headed in the same direction. And now I know that that is part of the reason that I have struggled to move forward, because I honestly thought that I would die. And at the time that he passed away, I didn't care. So I really have had to pull myself back from near death. So, right around the 3 year anniversary of Lance's passing, and that was also the 30-year anniversary of when we met, I recorded a little journal about how I was feeling at that time. And I'm going to share that right now to hopefully offer some hope, because you can see how much I have healed since that time. I'm just going to record this because um, I need to talk about this. In 3 days, it'll be 30 years since I met Lance. And I'm having a really hard time reliving those days. It's so hard to remember him healthy. It was so long ago. He got sick so early in our marriage, and our whole life was about him being sick. And I don't miss that life anymore, but I still grieve all the losses because there were so many losses. It was constant loss after loss after loss. And that's what I'm feeling right now, is all the losses, but also remembering all that excitement from when I first met him, and thinking about our future and all the hopes and dreams that we had, and knowing that the only thing that lasted was that we were together until death. And that's really hard. We didn't get to fulfill any of our dreams. And today I'm just feeling all of that. And I'm thinking about all the things that I missed out on in my life, and how different my life is, and why I can't relate to people. This has been really, really hard putting this together, because I have been pouring my heart into this, and I've been sharing my heart with people. And this 30-year journey that I've been on is just mine, and nobody understands. And I get that nobody's going to understand, but the fact that there's nobody that I can really talk to about it is really hard. I mean, I can say little things here and there, but everybody's so busy on their phones. Everybody's so tired of hearing about Lance. He's dead and he's gone. Why the hell don't I just get over it? I don't think it's something that I will ever get over. He's a part of me. He's a part of who I am. One of the things that I realized just recently was, I don't refer to myself as a widow. And I sat down and I journaled about it today, wondering why, because there are so many people who do identify as a widow. And I don't want that to be
who I am labeled as. Because to me, being a widow separates me from who I was when I was with Lance. And yes, I realize that it's different now that he's gone, but I am who I am because of the life that I had with him. And it doesn't mean that I want him here anymore. I guess what it means to me is by saying that I'm a widow, I'm separating myself from that life. And I can't do that because it was the biggest part of my life. Anyway, I just needed to get that out.
Listening to that episode a little over a year later, I can tell you that I have healed a lot during that time. And here is an episode that Jenna and I recorded a few months later. And I was already starting to heal at that point, but I was still having a hard time moving forward. So I want to share that. And then in the coming weeks, I will share some more of my healing process to offer hope. Today, we're going to talk about how to live when you're still not ready. And this is something that has come up because it's been 3 years since Lance passed away, but I am struggling to move forward. And I've heard a lot of people on both sides, one side, people who haven't been through it. It's been 3 years, get over it already. Or on the other side, people who have been through it, or people who have counseled others who have been through it that have said, you were a caregiver for over 25 years, and that was the biggest part of your life. And it's going to take a while to get through it. And when I talk to people who are still grieving after decades of losing someone that they love, whether it was a child or a parent or a spouse, whoever it was, there are still times that grief is going to hit. And I don't think that it's something that ever goes away. But right now is just a really heavy time for me. And I'm struggling, and I'm isolating a lot more. So this was actually a suggestion of Jenna's that we talk about this. So I'm going to pass this over to you, Jenna.
This is, I think, such an interesting topic because it provides room for the conversation on both sides to say, how do you be patient with yourself as you're going through processing? And I mean, I will say grieving, because there's a grief process in a lot of different things, not just death. Processing the grief, the grieving, but also holding yourself accountable for not being held back when you know there's still life ahead of you, and not dying along with whatever loved one or dream or whatever you've lost. Continuing to move forward and be authentic and live out the rest of your days. And it's always a balance between those two things, because there are going to be days that you feel vibrant and you feel as though you can conquer the world. Also days that you don't want to get out of bed, and being able to kind of reconcile those two things, and being, like I said, patient with yourself and patient with those around you. And for those of us that are trying to be supportive of friends and loved ones, remembering that there are going to be good days and not so good days and even better days. And how do you navigate that with grace, but with also a sense of reality?
It's a heavy load. This is a really heavy topic. I'm actually struggling a little bit to kind of formulate my thoughts on this. So I'm gonna just go back to right at the time when Lance passed away. And I've said in previous conversations that I wasn't sure if I would survive. And I didn't know if I wanted to. It was such a heavy load that I carried. And I knew that moving forward into whatever life had in store for me, I was going to be carrying this burden of everything that we went through. And it's not all bad things. There are so many amazing memories that I have from my life with him, but those are bittersweet because those are reminders of a loss too. So it's just been a matter of, I guess, putting everything together and being very intentional in the things that I do. And I know that I have mentioned that before, being intentional. And I think that that's what really has worked for me, is just being intentional about everything that I do. And so right now, when things get really tough, I tend to shut out the world. And you did point out to me that I'm not actually shutting out the world. I'm closing in my circle. I love how you put that. And that is actually very accurate. I kind of weed out the people that are causing stress, that are not understanding what's going on, that are maybe being critical, too opinionated, because I need to figure this out for myself. This is my life. I am 52 years old and I'm starting over from scratch. I still have all the memories of my life, but I was a caregiver for most of my adult life. So I am having to start over like somebody in their 20s, and having a career is something that is brand new for me. So I live in this little bubble in my house. I don't get out a whole lot, and it's something that works for me. I don't talk on the phone because that takes up my energy. But I spend a lot of time writing. I spend a lot of time just thinking about my life and thinking about the decisions that I've made that have gotten me where I am. And really, I guess I kind of give myself a pep talk every morning when I get up. And those are just some of the things, but also simplifying. And I think all of those things that I have said are things that really simplify my life, mainly cutting out all of the extra noise, which for me is people. And that might sound awful, but it's hard for me to focus on what I need to do when I have constant feedback from people telling me what they think I should do. I need to do what I need to do. And I know myself well enough to know that eventually this is all going to just pile on so much. I am going to completely lose it and become a bulldozer. And I don't want to do that. I did that when I was a caregiver. I didn't do it on purpose. I did it because I was so burned out and I was so tired of people coming into my life and saying, you know what you should do? Because everybody looking on the outside in can see what they think would work, but they're looking at it from their own perspective. And since I know that about myself, I know that I could become a bulldozer. I'll bring myself back inside and I stay away from people that I think might agitate me to the point that I'm going to do that.
That was one of the things that even brought us into that conversation, was just talking about knowing that limit to what you can handle. And you use the word intentional. And I think that's perfect. That's being wise, knowing these are my limits. And part of that, knowing your limits, is paying attention and being self-aware and being honest with yourself. That's huge. Being honest with yourself and saying, listen, I can or cannot handle X, and drawing that line in the sand, and then kind of giving yourself grace in those areas to protect the people around you so you don't become a hurricane, right? And cause unintentional damage, because nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to lash out in their grief or in their frustration or in their exhaustion. Nobody wants to be that. We all know people who do choose that path, who do choose the path of of misery and resentment and bitterness. And I think you and I talked about the fact that you will impact the world around you regardless. Like there's not a place where you can even even if you're in your bubble, there's no place where you can hide yourself away completely and not impact the world around you. So it's then making that intentional choice to be a positive impact on the world around you. And sometimes that means withdrawing so that you don't unintentionally hurt someone.
Right. But even like you said, even being in my house, I'm still impacting people because there are people who don't understand why I don't want to talk to them. And it isn't that I don't want to talk to people. It's that I am mentally unable to right now. It is exhausting. There's a lot going on in my life. It might look simple to somebody from the outside looking in because I don't leave my house very often. My life can look very simple. It's because I have simplified it to that point to do the very minimum amount because I'm doing all this work internally to process all of the things that I have been through in my life. I have struggled with depression. I have a diagnosis of PTSD. It was a very traumatic life that I lived with my husband, watching him almost die. I don't know how many times. And every single day, waking up for over 25 years, wondering if this is going to be the last day that I have on earth with him. It wasn't an easy life to live. I'm not complaining about that. I'm just trying to say this is some of the stuff that has impacted me and will impact me for the rest of my life. I know about 15 years ago, my husband was a disabled veteran, and I won't get into it now. At some point, I will talk about why, but we did go to, he had anger management at the VA hospital, and he wasn't able to drive. And so I took him to those appointments, and they were night appointments. And it was in the mental health building, and I was the only one sitting in the waiting area, and all these veterans with PTSD got together in this room and had this anger management meeting. And the social worker who was running it, she asked me if I wanted to maybe sit in on it since I was the only person in that waiting area. It was kind of creepy being in the dark by myself. And so I said yes. And so I went into this anger management, and I would say I sat there almost like a little mouse in the corner, just kind of observing, because I didn't feel like I really should be there. But then as they started talking more about things, I started realizing that there were things in there that applied to me. And I'm sure I had PTSD by that point already. I know I had anxiety and I dealt with depression, but it was not as complicated then as it is now. And I remember one of the veterans in there, and I mean, let me just explain. Let me see if I can just kind of describe what it was like sitting in this room full of veterans with PTSD. And there were probably at least a dozen veterans in there. And they had most of them had been dealing with PTSD from war. And the energy in that room was so intense. And there were so many, there was so much hurt and so much pain in that room. And it was so hard to be a part of it. And I just remember sitting in there and just feeling all of that energy from everybody, and just sitting there myself going, just kind of self-talking myself through, this is going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And just kind of repeating that over and over and over again. And that was how I just got through being in that room with these poor men who had been in war. And I remember one day one of them, he was one of the ones that just hurt so much. I could feel it. And he spoke up and he asked a question, and I just wanted to help so bad. And I responded in now what I know 15 years later was so simplified. And he just looked at me and he said, "You don't understand. You do not understand." And I just felt so taken aback by it, but I knew I didn't understand. And I think about that now when people respond to me, that they couldn't possibly know what it is like for me because they haven't been through it. And so I try to offer grace to everyone when they put that on me, because I know that they're just trying to help. But it's not helpful when people become angry and mean, and when they're trying to just get you to do what they think you should do because they don't understand why you can't move forward or you can't just let it go. This was my entire life. This was the love of my life. I gave up everything to take care of him, and I did it willingly because he was the love of my life and he was the most important person to me. And I wanted to make sure that he had the best life possible. So I did make that choice to take care of him and to give up everything. And now it's my time for me to do what I need to do to move forward. And so my hope in sharing this is that people will just stop and think about the things that they are saying to others. I mean, for me, myself, I'm struggling. I know that I can become a bulldozer when I get so overwhelmed with everybody piling everything on. So to keep people from piling things on, I just stop talking to people for a while. I allow myself some quiet time and some space to process the things that I need to. And that's not anything against anyone else. It's just what I need to do so that I can move into my next week or my next year or whatever it is.
I think that's all of that is so wise. I really do. And I think that being aware of your limitations and honest with yourself, because you know I think if we're honest with ourselves, we know where our fragile points are. We know where I hate to use the word triggers, but that's, where we become agitated and irritated easily, or the things that catch us off guard. If we're paying attention to ourselves, then we know kind of where those things are. And then we know what kinds of things to avoid. And we can keep ourselves in much better peace and avoid those situations where we might lash out at someone unintentionally, because I don't want to hurt people in my anger and frustration. And I know you don't. And sometimes it's just inevitable because you're pushed to a limit and you don't have a better way to respond. And so maybe just avoiding those situations, like you said, kind of withdrawing to an extent where you just either expand the bubble or close up the circle, however you want to look at it. But you put up those boundaries, and they aren't boundaries out of anger to try and keep people out. They're boundaries to protect your fragile spirit. And because it's not as if you're static, right? You are fragile and then you're stronger and then you stay stronger and you're never fragile again. It's a fluid kind of state of being. It's like, you have more vulnerable times and you have stronger times. And so being aware of that and being honest and adjusting your life to meet those stages and those seasons, I think it's one of the best things we can do so that we're ready when that stronger season comes. We're ready to move forward and expand a little bit more. And for you, being kind of in your house and closing in that bubble to just say, I'm just not cutting people out. I don't view you as cutting people out. I view you as giving yourself space. And to just say, I'm going to just give myself space for a while from input from other humans. and different stimuli that might be abrasive or cause a negative reaction. I'm going to just give myself some grace and kind of soften that space around me until I feel strong again. And then see where that goes. For me, it was cutting out social media. Like that's might not work for you and yours might not work for me. So it's knowing what it is that protects your fragile state.
Right. And just being supportive of people who are doing what they need to do to move forward too, because and sometimes I'm not moving forward. Sometimes I'm stuck for a day or two or a week. And sometimes I feel like I've moved backwards. It is very different, like you said. But one of the things in doing that is then I really have to be careful with that, because then people see me, and I do try to have a positive outlook on life. That's how I've gotten through this life, is to find the good things, to have gratitude. And that's what I try to put out there when I get out into the world. And so I hide myself away when I'm feeling like this. And then I get out into the world and I'm like, hey, how's it going? Oh my gosh, look at everything. It's so beautiful. Look at the sky, and I'm seeing all the good things. And then people think that I'm not struggling because I'm not sharing with them that I'm struggling, or I'm not sharing with them specifically what the struggles are. So I'm trying to balance all of that too. Like, how much do you share to let people know this really is a tough time that I'm going through? This is something that I am really struggling with. How do you balance that with being positive? We tend to do that with people based on their moods.
People don't exist in a vacuum. And I think if we have a little bit of sense, it's not that straightforward, right? When you encounter somebody, and I think if you've been on this earth more than a few years and you've met more than like 5 people, you should know that people are going to have good days and bad days. And maybe the more that someone has going on in their life, or the more they've been through, the increase and I would say the space, right, between those good days and bad days, like, it increases.
Yeah. Getting back to the original question or topic of how to just navigate this world, getting back into it is really just about simplifying and
being patient with yourself. I think that's so important. Being patient with yourself and being patient with the people around you on both sides, being patient with the people who are struggling and being patient with the people who may not know that you're struggling, being patient with you when you have a bad day, and giving grace, give it out as much as you can. I just think that is such an important piece to all of it, is affording grace to all the people around me. And it doesn't mean you become a doormat. It just means that you don't become bitter.
That's good. That's a good way to explain that, because when I had a lot of people tell me that when I was caring for Lance, you need to give yourself grace. I'm like, what does that even mean?
I think
But at the time, I was so angry and bitter. I guess I couldn't see beyond that. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, but giving yourself grace, I think, is not allowing yourself into that downward spiral of, I suck, my life sucks, everything is hard, I may as well just crawl in a hole. It's saying, man, I had a bad day, or I had a bad hour, but I still have things in my life to be grateful for, right? And focusing on that, I think that's having grace with yourself, and being intentional with those thoughts. And you'll have bad days and maybe bad weeks and maybe bad months, but not getting caught there, and not identifying yourself with the bad day, bad week.
Right. I think just the things that I'm doing too, just to get up in the morning and journal. I've been journaling for years, and I process a lot of my thoughts that way. I just write down whatever I'm feeling. And then when I'm feeling better, I go back and I read through my journals and I can see where I was stuck in something and I can see where I need to work on it. I've just been on this real, I think maybe it's because I lived such an isolated life with Lance, and I moved after he passed away and I came out into this world. I don't recognize it anymore. And I'm trying to figure out who I am and where I fit, because I feel like I don't really belong here. So I'm I look back at my journals and I try to figure out what I need to work on. How can I be a better person? How can I get through when something like this happens again? And that's really probably the easiest thing for me is journaling, and then just starting off my day with gratitude and ending my day with gratitude too.
Oh, gratitude is so important. Well, that's what leads us to grace, right? Because gratitude leads to humility, right? When you're thankful, then you become more humbled by the things that because of the things that you do have, because you realize how rich your life is, even when you don't have much. You become, more humbled in that. And I think when we become more humbled, that affords us grace to the people around us and to ourselves, because we realize that, we could be in that same position. That could be us, right? We see that in other people. Oh, that could be me having that bad day, because I know what I'm capable of in terms of bad days. And, even for ourselves, we think, man, I know I've had some bad days. And so I'm just thankful that today's a good day. And I just think it makes, like you said, you journal. I'm a talker, and mine is talking to people. And every time I can engage, even if it's for 5 minutes with a stranger and they tell me something about them, um, whatever it is, they tell me something about them. And it helps me feel connected. And when I feel connected, then I feel more human. And when I feel more human, that's where my grace kind of comes in. As I think, well, I hope someone's kind to me someday. So I'm going to throw that out there. Right. But it's funny that you mentioned journaling, because that is not something that has ever been, and I'm not going to say not useful for me. I just have never been able to develop the habit, because it just isn't how my brain processes. I needed another human I journal in other people's brains.
Well, that's kind of what we're doing right now. I mean, it's like counseling too. I mean, I did go to counseling for the last 11 years that I took care of Lance. I had a counselor that I saw. We had regular appointments for many years. It was every week. And that was my journaling then. I went in there and I just got it all off my chest. So
I think it's so cool, though. I'm always maybe a little bit jealous that people are able to journal, because I think that would be so cool. And I've spent some time being frustrated with myself that I couldn't look back on my life in written form and remember moments or times or events or things like that. But then I think that's just wasn't my journey. Like, whatever, it wasn't my journey. And this is where I'm at. And I'll continue going forward on what has brought me peace and what has brought me joy. And this is one more area that you and I are very different, but that I love about you.
yeah, I don't have very many similarities with a lot of people. So
Neither do I.
maybe that's where we're the same. We're both so different. Anyway, well, this has been another good conversation. I hope it's helpful. And thank you again for joining me, Jenna.
Well, see ya. Bye.
Bye. After listening to this episode, I can say that I have healed so much in the past year. So stay tuned. In the coming weeks, there will be more episodes that we record about my healing process to offer some hope to people who are going through similar circumstances.